Today is the day to talk about War Machine from 2026, which I watched yesterday afternoon. It's a Netflix production that's starring Alan Ritchson. Man, I knew I had to mention this guy, right? Alan Ritchson, because apparently he's the guy who's famous now. He's on the rise because he's the main character in a series called Reacher. I have no idea what this Reacher series is about, but I can see it's something important. So I have to mention it, right? Because the guy is really famous now, and he's in this movie, which at least seems a bit like the kind of character he plays. He's already doing a series, okay? So what's the plot behind War Machine here? First, I have to say that it has the same title as another Netflix movie from 2017, also called War Machine, which stars Brad Pitt. So, two War Machine movies on Netflix a few years apart, right? But this one is a movie about a United States Army soldier, an engineer from the engineering corps, sapper, as they say in the movie, right? The less formal term is sapper, isn't it? And I think, man, I'm just remembering here that I think I saw Sapero at some point in the Netflix subtitles. I'm not sure if I really saw Sapero. It might be my imagination, but I'm sure, really sure, that Netflix put a "get out of there, man, get out of there" in the subtitles. That's Brazilian Portuguese at its peak, right? You can't really go much further than that, but anyway, it's a movie that starts, right? There's a scene in Afghanistan during the American campaign in Afghanistan, which started in 2001. It went on until, if I'm not mistaken, 2022. I'm not sure exactly, but we see two brothers there, these two brothers, and one of them is Alan Richardson's character, right? The other is his brother. I can't remember the actor's name right now, and they have that exchange, you know, a real tough guy conversation, American Army style, right? Here it's idiot in command, and the other one, who's this son of a bitch asking questions? Then they'll realize they're brothers. Then they start a conversation about becoming Army Rangers, right? They're going to become Army Rangers, but why? Because the guy has wanted this since they were young, right? So then some problems are going to happen. And finally, his brother, the protagonist, Alan Richardson, is going to try to become an Army Ranger. So the whole plot of the movie revolves around that, right? Even though we take a pretty steep detour into the science fiction genre, since this plot about military training, this story of a soldier bitter about his past, wants to become an Army Ranger. Anyway, he and his companions are going to find an alien probe, right? An alien probe that is nothing more than a killing machine, a war machine. Yeah, actually, a machine of genocide, right? Anyone who has seen the 90s anime Genocyber will remember this concept of genocide by machines of unknown origin, right? That actually looks a lot like what the Terminator does too, but in our current time, not in the apocalyptic future setting. So that's the kind of environment where this movie takes place, right? And it really takes advantage of this recent neurosis about those interstellar objects that have been detected and observed passing through our solar system, right? Oumuamua and, more recently, 3E Atlas, which is still here near the solar system, right? So a lot of people raise the possibility that these objects could be alien objects. And the movie kind of picked up on that idea. Let's make some money with this. Let's take this idea and put it in a military movie again, right? Again, because it's not really an original idea either, as I'm going to tell you here. Well, this movie is probably one of the best ones to use that Leonardo DiCaprio meme, right? You remember that one where he looks at the television like, oh, I remember that. Hey, I got the reference. You know, this movie basically doesn't have anything new, nothing original. Everything that shows up in it can be traced back to another recent movie or one from 30 years ago, but famous movies. So what does it seem like to me, man? It seems to me that this movie is financed, I believe even secretly, right? not admitted. But it's financed by the Pentagon. It's financed by the Army. Because it has that whole military movie vibe, to speak well of the institution, it has that whole vibe of a movie that wants to promote the ideals of the force. And in the United States, because we're talking about an environment that doesn't have mandatory military conscription, right? Every American soldier has to be a volunteer for the force. So it's necessary there in the United States for media pieces to be produced to convince the young population, right? Top Gun was one of those productions. Later, we saw Battle Los Angeles, and after that, Battleship, which in itself was financed by the United States Navy. So all these movies are films financed by the armed forces to make a military career more attractive to young people. And, well, today, all the data shows that young people are consumed by streaming. So, of course, the Pentagon would finance a Netflix production, right? But I didn't find any official statement saying that the Pentagon did that. But to me, man, it seems very clear that it was funded by the Department of Defense. Yeah. Okay, we have this thing with Leonardo DiCaprio, right? Several times in the movie you see, for example, when his brother dies, right, at the beginning of the movie. By the way, I'm going to give some spoilers in this video. Yeah, so if you haven't seen War Machine yet, I suggest you stop and go watch it, okay? So, when his brother dies at the beginning of the movie, you can notice that right away Leonardo DiCaprio's image appears. Oops, that's the excuse the guy needs to be able to join the Ranger training. And right after that, then you have the space part, right? The National Aeronautics and Space Administration news following a supposed asteroid that shows up 2 or 3 times at the beginning of the movie, just minutes apart. I mean, the whole narrative shifts to this specific news report with National Aeronautics and Space Administration following it. So again, you like, oops, that's from the movie. And later, out of nowhere, you also have a quarry being shown down there, a private quarry, right, being shown down there. Why is that? I don't know, but then you can already tell it has something to do with the ending of the movie, right? Well, the movie focuses, right, on the issue of becoming a ranger. And it seems like it really wants to instruct either civilians or military personnel on how to become a ranger. Because one of the first dialogues in the movie is the protagonist's brother saying to him, "Do you remember that we wanted to become rangers? So I'm thinking about starting the process to become a ranger." Then the guy replies to him, "Oh, you're referring to the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, the Army Ranger Selection Program." It's like if, here in Brazil, the Ministry of Education financed a movie with the following line, "Oh, I really wanted to go to college, you know? I'm really wanting to take the test to go to college." And then the other person replies, "Oh, you're talking about the NM, right? The NM, National High School Exam." It's exactly the same vibe. Dennis Quaid, he's the most famous actor in the movie, Dennis Quaid, and he plays a sergeant major, which is kind of like a general of the sergeants, you know, a brigadier general of the sergeants, right, in the military career of the United States Army. So he's a sergeant already at the top of his career, right? He's an E9, if I'm not mistaken, an E8 or an E9. And Dennis Quaid, man, he's 71 years old, and he seems to me already too old to play the role of a sergeant. Even if it's a sergeant at the top of his career, 70 years old. But he has a really small part in the movie. You can tell that his lines were probably recorded all in one day, and then he just went home, right? So it was really easy money for Dennis Quaid in this production. But when it's shown that Dennis Quaid is a sergeant major, right, the chief sergeant of the troop, it's clear in the movie because you look around and there's no one above him. You notice that throughout the whole movie. There isn't a single officer. There's no officer, no lieutenant, no captain, no major, no general. There's no one. It's just enlisted troops, right? Or enlisted in the United States, so it's not a flaw. That's just my observation, but I found it interesting. Because the sergeant major, Dennis Quaid, has an office. He has a room, a super luxurious office, just like a general would have, right? None of the protagonists in the movie, none of them except for Dennis Quaid, and another chief sergeant, a first sergeant, none of them have names. They're all referred to by numbers. So you have number 81, who's the main character, right? You have number 44, who's a woman, and you have number 7. So who's a soldier who already has some kind of past connection with the protagonist's family? And you have number 15. Who's the comic relief? The comic relief that you'll see later in this movie. What will happen to him, right? What's going to become of him? The rest of the troop in the movie, right, is shown in the movie, because the movie is going to show a selection process, which is very rigorous, and many, really many are dismissed, are rejected. And there are about 15 guys left who, in the end, will be sent to a final exercise, an exercise that lasts a few days, which will, if they complete it, if it's completed, right, will guarantee them the Ranger insignia that they put here on their shoulder. They can wear the Ranger insignia on their shoulder. And then they're going to head out on this mission, and they're going to be dropped off by helicopter, right? In a particular reserve there in Colorado, a forest reserve in Colorado. And then things are going to change pretty quickly, because first they're armed with blank ammunition, so they don't have access to rifle ammo. For real, right? They have access to real explosives from what the movie shows us, and just one radio. But then, man, like I told you, it's going to land right in front of that, over there, right? Actually, it's going to hit the ground in front of them. A big coincidence. Actually, this alien probe, and this alien probe deserves a little consideration from us, right? Because it's a kind of robot. It's a precursor robot, and it's a Terminator. Did you notice throughout the movie that there was already some kind of pre-programmed calibration in that robot? Because it knew that it should destroy, eliminate only human beings. At no point in the movie do you see the robot killing animals in the forest. It's specifically calibrated to kill human beings, right? And the whole face of the robot, the whole look of it, man, there's nothing original about it either. And that left me a little disappointed. Why? The sound effects come from Transformers. You can clearly notice the sound effects from the movies, from the robots. You remember, and you'll see them again in this movie, so there's nothing new. But it also combines elements from the tripods, the war tripods, from War of the Worlds, because once it's activated, it has that whole connection sequence. You remember, it's like an engine starting, like a jet engine being activated. So there's all of that in the movie. The monster in the movie is a robot that in the end takes the form of an ED-209. And that's it. No one can take that out of my mind. Even now, I would really like to be able to investigate more and find out if it's true or not, I think. Do you guys remember the RoboCop movie by Jose Padilla? And how did Jose Padilla take that RoboCop from Paul Verhoeven from the 80s? The one that was silver and became famous. He turned him into a black thing with a red light like a visor, kind of like a Cyclops version of RoboCop. No one can convince me otherwise today that this robot from the movie War Machine is a leftover from Jose Padilla's RoboCop production, because it's the ED-209 with the style of Jose Padilla's RoboCop. Tell me it's not. Look, that's exactly the same. It's undeniable, man. It's undeniable. And I think the choice of an alien intelligence sending a bipedal robot to Earth, a robot that walks instead of a robot that simply flies, right? That can hover above the ground, that could cross difficult terrain much more easily that way, right? But choosing a bipedal robot that slips, it slips several times in the movie. It's a killer alien probe that slips several times in the movie. So It's also a robot that's blind. Have you noticed that? It's a blind robot. It really can't see, analyze the scene, or use its cameras. It can't do a real-time analysis. It has to stop, and that's where the reference to the predator comes in, right? It has to stop and do that scan to detect if there's a human there or not. It doesn't matter if the human is 1,000 meters away or 2 meters away. It's not sure. It has sensors to detect. It has to stop and do that scan. And then when it detects, that's when it attacks. And did you notice that the weapon of the alien killer robot can't pierce the armor of an American reconnaissance vehicle? It simply can't get through the armor. I thought this alien was really low tech. That's what I thought. Its onboard technology is really low, right? For a civilization that can send probes to the other side of the galaxy to exterminate other civilizations, it's really low-tech technology. Besides, you know what it is? The robot's weak point? It's its radiator. Imagine that. You can block or destroy the killer probe in a few seconds, like the movie shows, just by covering its radiator. Yeah, honestly, I've never seen an alien probe with that kind of weakness, right, in the movies. Although the Death Star from Star Wars, its weak point is its radiator, right? But I think those are two different things, man. When the robot stands up for the first time, you also find yourself wondering why. The Rangers who are about to graduate as Rangers, but by no means are they untrained soldiers. Are they beginner, inexperienced soldiers? No, they all have experience. But those Rangers just stood there, simply standing, watching some kind of unknown device getting up, turning toward them, and then scanning them. Man, I think just seeing that robot getting up there, the way it got up. At first, anyone, not just a ranger, but anyone would have gotten out of there. They would have run and taken cover. Are you going to wait for the robot to fully arm itself and then scan you? What do you expect to happen next? That a bouquet of flowers is going to come out of there? No, right. No, geez. So that's one of the things that made me not like the way the Rangers are portrayed. I think that's a flaw of the writers. If this movie was really funded by the Pentagon, it should have been refined, taken out of the script, right? But it gets worse later because you see that the script makes a point of drawing a clear line between the protagonist, right? Alan Richardson, who's like a Superman, nothing gets to him. He has no difficulties, no bad days. Nothing can break the guy. And the others, who are treated like babies, not shown as babies in the movie because they take a sergeant who's dying there. I don't even think they really knew the guy. And they start crying over him because he died. And they ask for a minute. Ah, please. A minute for us to mourn the death of the instructor here. Even though they're being hunted by an alien exterminator. Now, everyone already knows what the creature is capable of because it has already ripped their colleagues in half, smashed heads, and in the end, wounded the boss. Their group leader, who is 07, man. And this 07, he's probably the Ranger with the toughest body in the history of cinema. I think if we have to compare him to someone, it's maybe Tom Cruise from Mission Impossible or 007 from some movies. Because this guy spends basically the whole movie strapped to a stretcher with a hurt leg. Because the robot, I don't know if it shot him or hit his leg somehow, but his leg was bandaged. And right after that, this guy's strapped to a stretcher and he falls off a cliff. Then he falls into the river, really diving in, falls into the river down below, and then he falls from a waterfall. After that, he's loaded up. They carry him on a stretcher through the rain, and he's put into the armored vehicle. The armored vehicle shakes more than anything, and he falls out of the armored vehicle at high speed. I don't know how he wasn't trampled by the robot, but 07 doesn't die. He doesn't die. And even being there with his leg open with a huge wound, he doesn't get a fever. He doesn't have any hemorrhage. He doesn't have a head injury. He doesn't break any bones, nothing. The guy simply survives. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. And then, in the end, man, the movie, after everyone is gone, right, suddenly, and the protagonist finds himself alone, he becomes the predator. He becomes a kind of predator. Anyone who has seen Predator from the 80s with Arnold Schwarzenegger knows exactly what I'm talking about. But it's not just the predator, that final scene, it's Schwarzenegger hunting the predator, mixed with Ellen Ripley hunting the queen. Alien. In Aliens, the sequel, you notice that, right? That scene, that whole sequence in the quarry, it's set up and lit exactly like the cargo deck in the final scene of Aliens. The sequel, even. Man, when Ellen Ripley comes out, right? With that kind of mechanical exoskeleton, the cargo loader, right? Yellow. It's the same vibe as the protagonist coming out of the garage with that front loader, right? Who goes to crush the robot against the wall, and that giant black robot there is also very similar to the queen. The aesthetic is the same, even the protagonist. He says he drops a, "You want a piece of me? You want a piece of me?" I don't know if Ellen Ripley says exactly that, but when she says it, it's "Get away from her, you bitch. Get away from her, you. It's the same vibe. It's the same thing. Everything is very similar. So you see that in the end, like I said, the guy manages to destroy the robot by simply closing, just blocking its radiator. And then it overheats and explodes. And then the robot's ammunition, right, starts leaking out of it. And the last scene, I'll put it on the screen so you can be sure of what I'm talking about. It's copied, man, almost frame by frame from the end of Predator, almost frame by frame. Actually, I think the face the protagonist makes, the face Schwarzenegger makes, like a shit or something like that. They look with wide eyes, then they run and then jump, and the explosion happens behind them. Exactly the same, exactly the same, exactly the same. And then, man, in the end, the guy manages to finish. The symbolism is there. He manages to finish the Ranger training. He gets his Ranger insignia, and he alone saves the world. Because no one else noticed that the robots have a bright red exhaust, always open on the top. No one else. Apparently now that's the tactic. Let's block their radiators somehow. Now why, you tell me why. Why is the protagonist the only one who can't wear a helmet? He's going to war, so why can't he wear a helmet? Everyone's wearing a helmet. Where is it? Helmet, soldier? You're going to war, damn it. But look, it's just a rant. It doesn't mean this movie is all bad. No, okay, it's a simple script, extremely simplified. Maybe it's suitable for today's younger audiences because I've read about how movies are developed nowadays. For people who are on their phones all the time, who have to check social media constantly, and I admit to you that a couple of times during the movie I did that. I picked up my phone to check updates, and do you know what I missed? Zero. Nothing. I didn't feel like I missed anything from the movie. So maybe its purpose was fulfilled. Maybe War Machine is a success in what it set out to do. Because I think also, I'm 42 years old, I think so too. Most of the people who watch the movie have never even seen these movies I referenced here, right? And they don't even know what movies these are. For them, these movies are old stuff. So, the result might not be as silly for them as it was for me, but it's a movie that carries itself forward like that. There are some good scenes. There are scenes, some scenes are tense. The scene in Rio, for example, is a tense scene. The first part there of that scene where they're trying to get the armored vehicle out of that position so they can leave with it is also a tense and interesting scene. But in the end, if you don't want to watch War Machine, you're not missing anything. You're really not missing anything. I watched it, and I'll take that burden off your shoulders, okay? In the end, War Machine doesn't have anything new. It's also not the worst thing ever that deserves a 2-cannon salute, and that's it. Did you also watch War Machine? Do you agree with what I said? Do you completely disagree with me? Tell us here in the comments. I want to know your opinion. And if you like this video, share it with your friends. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the War Room so you don't miss anything else. I'll stop here. Thank you again for watching, and here's a big hug from the War Room.